You're listening to episode 78, Kara's Story, a son with a brain tumor and his journey after the resection.
In my journey of all of this, in figuring out who I am through the lens of supporting my son through brain cancer, is I think I used to think that there was something wrong with me. Like I might be broken, like I might not do emotions right. I've come to realize that one, there is no right way to do it. And I think that yes, I definitely go into numbing.
Hello, my friends. I'm so happy you're here today. I'm Katie Taylor, host of the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm a child life specialist, which means we help parents and kids and family members cope with hospitalizations and medical experience and different life challenges. And this podcast serves as a purpose to give those parents a space to share their journey from their perspective, and let other parents hear it and find connection, and let some other hospital workers and clinicians hear what it's like to be a parent. So I'm so excited to have Kara here with me today. You got to hear a little soundbite from her at the beginning, and she's the host of the Special Needs Mom podcast. But one of the things I want you to listen to is they have kind of a different journey, in that a lot of times you'll hear a child has cancer, they go through treatment, and then they come out the other side, right? Or they have a tumor and the tumor's removed. But what happens when the tumor's removed? And that's great and that's amazing, and we've resected the cancer, but it leaves long-lasting brain damage and different conditions. And that's what Kara talks about today, and she gets really honest. And the part I want you to pick up on is her perseverance through it all. It's not one of these things that, something bad happens and then you just stop and you sulk. She continually finds ways to not only better her child, but better herself. And now she's bettering a whole community through her life coaching services. So I'm so glad you're here today. Let's get started with Kara's story.
Well, my name is Kara Ryska, and I am a mom. I'm a wife. I am a coach. I'm a life coach, and I'm a mom to 4 children, one of who has multiple special needs now, and I'm sure we'll get into all the details of that later. And we live in Southern California, in San Diego County, in a little town called San Marcos. So many of you might have heard of it.
Well, we have a San Marcos down near Austin, but I guarantee
yes.
is not as beautiful as where you live.
Actually yesterday, I was Googling something, trying to find something in San Marcos, and often it brings me to Texas. And so I'm very aware that there's a San Marcos, Texas as well.
Awesome. Take us back to the beginning. Levi is 12, is that right?
Yes, he just turned 12 last May, recent May.
Oh, okay. So talk to us a bit about Levi and what the whole beginning of this journey was like for you guys, if you can take yourself back there.
Yeah, definitely. So Levi was 2 and 3 months, and I'll just give you a little bit of a little picture of our life state or life circumstance at that time. So he was, a toddler doing his toddler things. And then I also had a 4-year-old, my oldest son at the time. And I was also newly pregnant, 10 weeks pregnant with who would be my 3rd son. And I worked part-time. And so I was, kind of mixing it up with the kids, but, Levi fell ill, we would say, and kind of had flu-like symptoms. And I knew kind of in my mom gut that something was definitely happening, but I don't think I wanted to go to the place of this could be really big. So anyhow, he was kind of vomiting, and you just really you can tell when your child does not feel well. He wasn't well, but it also wasn't so extreme that I was rushing him to the ER. So over the next 10 days, I took him down to the doctor 3 times. And on that 3rd time, the doctor finally was like, okay, I think you guys need to go to the hospital to get checked out. And so we did. And I don't know I guess it was because we were going to the hospital that we ended up meeting my parents in a town close by so that they could take my 4-year-old, so we didn't have to take him to the doctor. And I also remember, like, I was pregnant and hungry. So on the way down, of course, we got like a breakfast sandwich at McDonald's or something.
Yeah.
And so we get to the hospital and they start doing kind of their normal routine of kind of figuring out what's going on. Or actually now in hindsight, I think that the doctor that sent had an idea of what was happening. And so they probably started there. They started with a CT scan.
Okay.
And then they sent us up to do some lab work. And when so that we were with Levi at the time, they were trying to do some lab draws. He was not cooperating. He was probably pretty dehydrated at that point. And the doctor came in and was like, we can stop. Like, you're good. Like she let her team know that they didn't need to continue poking him. And my husband says, he's like, I knew something was happening then, because why would they just stop all of a sudden? I didn't pick it up as quickly, but she walked us to, she agreed. I don't remember exactly the words. This is now like 10 years ago, but she assured us that he was going to be fine, that they were going to stay with Levi. And then she wanted to see if we could go talk in another room. And she actually did ask me to sit down, and she just really calmly said, so there's a mass in your son's head, and there's treatment options, and the team from Rady Children's Hospital is on the way. We need to bring him there so that he can get the treatment that he needs. And yeah, I mean, that's the moment where, as a mom, or in my experience, that you experience the kind of words that change your life in an instant. And I think what I immediately thought was, I cannot believe this is happening to me. And obviously, of course, I'm concerned with my son. Like, that was
right.
Obviously in my space. But I think it was like, I knew that these things happened in the world, but the idea that this was happening in my world was, I don't know, like, it was just confronting me. And, you know, at that point, I actually go very much into activate, where I figure out how I'm going to get through this. It kind of, I guess, lack of better word, stimulates me, where I kind of am able to go into, what do I need to learn? What do I need to do? Who do I need to tell? How do I need to advocate for my son? And so it's kind of, we just, I got in the ambulance. My husband followed in the car. I started calling people, and we kind of, went into figuring out what to do to treat him from there.
Wow. And so you had to return with your husband to the hospital room, and then I guess wait for the transportation, the ride to get you over to Rady Children's. And all you had with you was basically probably your purse and a breakfast sandwich wrapper.
Oh, I ate that sandwich. That sandwich was gone. You're right, the wrapper. Yes, you're right. That was long gone. Yeah. And so actually it all happened very quickly, I think, because we were already down in San Diego. We were probably, 10 or 15 minutes away from the hospital that they were transferring us to. And so by the time she had finished telling us what was happening, the transport team, gosh, they might have even already had Levi on the gurney. I feel like when we came out of the room, what I remember is that they already had, I guess that's what happened. They already had Levi ready to go. They were hooking him up to monitor him, and then to basically get him in the ambulance. And I don't know, it still like mind boggles me to realize, like, we walked in there holding our child, and we left there with him hooked up to, all of the equipment, monitoring equipment, to make sure that he was okay, because they were able to assess he was definitely not okay. And just not like going from the realization to that in such a quick, like, time span. It's like I said, it still just kind of boggles my mind a little bit.
Do you remember when you were sitting there with the doctor next to your husband, if you had an emotional reaction, like if you cried or if you felt shocked? And the reason I ask is because I think there's a lot of different ways to process that kind of information. You spoke about activating and kind of getting into that fight or flight mode, and did you happen to have an emotional reaction as well?
It's a really good question. So the way that I respond in these types of situations is, stoic is the way that would come to mind. Like if someone was watching me, they would probably be like, did she just hear what I said?
Yeah.
Because you would see me be very quiet. You'd see me be very, like maybe stone-faced actually.
Right.
And it's almost like, I guess it's my way of controlling the experience. And so I think that would be my immediate response is in taking information, I definitely didn't cry at first. I was kind of just figuring out what's happening? What do we need to do? But I would say later that day, and so that I don't remember what time it was. It was obviously I got the breakfast sandwiches in the morning at sometime. And so after I got through the initial impact of like understanding what was happening, I definitely had an emotional reaction. I feel like I was recently talking to somebody telling them this as well, that I feel like the type of crying that I experienced that day was like no other that I've actually even ever experienced, where it was coming from such a deep devastation that it was just it was a very whole body type of crying and very deep. And I wouldn't say uncontrollable, but I would just say so strong. And so part of that experience of that day where I remember when they got to the hospital, they brought us right up into the PICU and they kind of, getting him situated, getting him inside, and quickly they let us know that they needed to install a shunt to relieve some of the pressure in his brain. And so they were going to do that procedure. We had to be out of the room for that. And so we had to be out of the room. So my husband and I had a moment to be together outside. And I remember exactly where I was in the front of the hospital. Just, I guess the best word I could use to describe it was weeping or maybe sobbing, but it was a much more guttural expression of just devastation of what was happening.
Yeah, it sounds like a much needed release to like the shocking news, the processing, and then the release, which is, manifests for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's rage, sometimes it's weeping, like you said, sometimes it's, shutting down and not feeling anything. And I'm so glad that you brought up the stoic response, because I think a lot of families feel like, why am I not crying? You know what? I just heard the worst news ever. And it's okay to respond to things in different ways. And there's going to be time for probably all of it.
Yes. And I think I've learned to like recognize, because I think for a while I would be like in my journey of all of this, like in figuring out who I am through the lens of supporting my son through brain cancer, is I think I used to think that there was something wrong with me. Like I might be broken, like I might not do emotions right. I've come to realize that one, there is no right way to do it. And I think that yes, I definitely go into numbing. And for me, it takes me a little bit to like actually kind of intake and to experience the feeling of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think I also learned the gift of it. Like there was I won't give the details of it, but there was an emergency type situation with my husband years ago, and he just went into complete freeze. Like he just didn't respond at all. And I was able to like activate, in this case, get out of the car, run around, get a fire extinguisher, and like completely resolve the situation. And then later feel the oh my gosh, we
Yeah.
just almost blew up our car,
Oh,
and so like, I think I can see the gift in it,
oh
the
yeah.
gift of the survival mechanism that everybody has, that mine looks like I get to like completely shut down, get through it. And then I typically invite the feelings in.
Oh, I mean, that's like a hell of a superpower and a gift. And it reminds me so much of like ER nurses that I have the privilege of working with,
Mm-hmm.
that it just
Mm-hmm.
total chaos and they are in it. Like, they just get it done. And it's moms of kids who have medical experiences and special needs are that exact same way.
Yeah. So I
Do you,
think it's something that you all, like I said, like, I think I used to think something might be wrong with me,
yeah.
but now I'm like, it's a skill I'm glad I have. And I
Mm.
probably actually, like, before I was aware as I am now, it probably would have taken me a lot longer to actually open up to the emotions that come. I think for a long time, a lot of us are scared of the emotions that might exist after you go through something like, the people that listen to your podcast do. And so I think recognizing like that I have gotten better at like allowing and feeling my emotions. And so usually the time between whatever event and feeling the emotions is a lot shorter. But every case is different.
Yeah. So what did they end up diagnosing Levi with?
So they diagnosed with him like they were, I guess it was probably the first day, was a type of brain tumor. It is specifically called a craniopharyngioma. And I believe, if I'm correct, that it's about 2% of brain tumors overall. It might be pediatric brain tumors, but so it's not a common tumor, and they're typically found in pediatrics, and they generate from the pituitary, and so they're kind of right. For those of you who don't know where the pituitary is, like right in the center of your brain, kind of like behind your eyeballs, kind of in that nice little like ridge in your brain, behind your nose as well.
And so I guess they placed the shunt. And what did they talk to you about treatment options or prognosis? And what was y'all's next step for dealing with it?
Yeah, so the shunt was obviously, like I said, to relieve the pressure that was there, and one of the symptoms he was having on that 10th day before, when we brought him to the doctor again, is he was having kind of like his eyes were starting to bulge out occasionally in weird ways, like he was kind of making funny things with his eyes.
Yeah,
and that was, now we learned, from the pressure in his brain, and so the shunt was to relieve that pressure. And the plan was to perform a craniotomy to remove the tumor. In this case, the neurosurgeon was on vacation, and so he wasn't going to be back for 5 days. And so we had to basically just wait it out. And in this case also, it was explained to us that this tumor type does not respond to chemo, so that's not an option. And that radiation would be a secondary option, but not a good option, as they really always try to avoid radiation in children's brains. And so they were hopeful. The plan A was to have a complete resection so that we didn't have to have any secondary radiation. I always thought it was interesting how in that 5-day waiting period, that Levi had a shunt. And so for the listeners, when you have a shunt, you probably know this, but when you have a shunt, you can't just get up. In this type of shunt, I should say. When you have an external shunt, you can't just get up because your cerebral spinal fluid would fluctuate and you would feel very unwell. And so they had to lock up the shunt, and like basically he could barely get out of bed. Like I got to hold him a handful of times, but it was a lot to get out of bed, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. But he never went. So imagine a 2-year-old, 2 years and 3 months, never once trying to get out of bed. Like I just look back, I'm like, it tells me how badly he felt. Right. That he just sat there, laid there the whole time, being his sweet little self, talking. He was talking. He was very alert, and like overall his well-being seemed good. But for him not to attempt a single time to move out of the bed, like it's still just kind of, I guess it just really stands out to me.
Oh yeah, it's just totally heartbreaking because that's not really the child that you brought in, and then that's the child that you're looking at, and it's hard to process.
Yeah. Yes, very much so.
I can imagine when the neurosurgeon showed up, you were like, "How was your vacation? Let's get to work."
Well, it's one of those things where like, okay, so he was on vacation. I was like, okay, this is good. This is good. He's going to be real rested. I like this. But then I definitely was thinking, oh gosh, I hope he had a good flight. I hope he slept well. Like, yeah. I know, all these things. I was definitely very concerned about his vacation.
Yes.
Yeah. This is an interesting kind of part of the experience. So we hadn't, because he was in Hawaii, that's where he was coming back. We didn't have a chance to talk to him prior to the day of the surgery. I think the surgery was going to be at around 11. And of course they have all the instructions for the surgery day, and they kind of prepped us. So it was just a very long morning of waiting. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we were going to get to do is meet the surgeon before they took him over to the OR. And Dr. Levy is the surgeon, and he has a pretty large stature. Like, he just is a tall man, and he just walks in and he just has this like cool, calm, and collected demeanor. It wasn't cocky. It was just so reassuring that he was just like, yeah, so we're going to do a brain surgery, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And like, for me, like, I'm thinking, this is freaking brain surgery. This is very bad. This is very dangerous. Like, we should not be cutting open my head son. But he was just kind of like, we're going to just do this. And I remember thinking, oh, okay. Like, so he's got this. Like, right. We're good. And I don't know, like, I still look back to that, and I still am so thankful that he carried himself in that way, that like, this was just his job. Like, he was just going to go take the tumor out. Like, that I could just kind of, as much as you can, rest assured that like, he had this handled. And I'm really so thankful that I was able to have that going into the surgery.
Oh, I love that. And I think it's so interesting. He's Dr. Levy and this is Levi. It's like that connection, right? Of such a similar name.
Totally.
Oh gosh, I agree. There's something about, that's like exactly the man you want, or woman, just with that type of reassurance that just makes you feel calm. Like, what a gift they have, in addition to like being a neurosurgeon, by the way. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely.
So how was the surgery? Was it successful, and were they able to get it out? We'll be right back. Hey guys, did you know Child Life on Call is more than just a podcast? We have free resources for parents, kids, and professionals. And by the way, a new app coming out in 2022. We will be partnering with facilities to empower and educate kids, parents, and the care team, and we want you to be a part of it. Sign up to have the facility you visit or work for be one of the first to have access at childlifeoncall.com.
Yes. So in terms of tumor resection, it was very successful. So I'm sure you've witnessed parents, as they're waiting to get the updates on the phone, and the kind of the torture of just kind of that waiting period of not knowing exactly how it's going, and getting the calls and not knowing if that call is going to be like, oh my gosh, it's going so great, or like some really bad news. So those are not my favorite calls. But finally, we were able to hear from the nurse. They called us in to meet with Dr. Levy afterwards. And again, he was just kind of like, yeah, well, I think we got it all. It wasn't lackadaisical that he was at, but it was just like so simple the way he would speak. And you could tell he felt good about the surgery. But I also could tell that it was, I don't remember exactly how he communicated this, but it was like, it was a big one. Like he was like, this was and he definitely didn't say it like this, but I learned that it was like a very large tumor and a very complex surgery. And so tumor, like I said, tumor-wise, resection, 100% successful from what they could tell. And of course, he said, yes, we'll be doing scans. You know, you can't always tell. He felt good about it. But what we learned is that, and he didn't tell us this. I do believe that he knew the impacts of the resection at the time that he did them. Obviously, that's his job to know what he's doing. That the impact of the surgery was that essentially Levi would have a surgical stroke in the sense that part of his brain was vascularly connected through the tumor, so that by resecting the tumor, they also selectively chose to damage part of his brain. And so they, again, didn't tell us this, but now looking back, they were observing him in a way which I could tell that they knew that what they were looking for. They were looking for him to not have movement in his arms and his legs. They were looking for his vision to be impacted. And then they had prepped us for the possibility of him having a condition called panhypopituitarism, which is a very long word to say that you don't have a pituitary that works. And so as a result of the surgery, over the next, I would say year plus, we would learn all the impacts of the surgery. And I say that because right away we did know about the panhypopituitarism. We knew that he had hemiplegia, so half of his body, much like somebody that, you know, you're more familiar with seeing that has a stroke, where they have less mobility of part of their body. He had that. Like, he had no movement of his arm and his leg on the left side. And then we would find out over the next year, maybe even year and a half, that he was blind, fully blind in his right eye. And then even up until the last, maybe even 5 years, we're understanding the full extent of the impact to the frontal lobe as it relates to behavior and impulse control and emotional regulation. And so I do look back at the experience of kind of the trickling diagnoses versus the all in one day. And I actually, something I'm grateful for, because I think, you know what, like, thank you, God, that I didn't have to absorb all that in one day, that I didn't have to grieve all of that in one day, that I actually didn't have to hold it all in one day, that it could just kind of trickle in, and that I could kind of maybe even get better at grieving. The vision was devastating loss, right? To like lose complete vision in one of your eyes. And so, yeah, that's kind of how the tumor resection surgery went. And we still scan every year. And I think we will now for at least a couple more years. I think probably until he's 18, 19, 20. I guess that's more than a couple years. So that's the kind of the tumor prognosis that we have.
What do you think have been some of the most difficult parts about understanding the true impact of that resection?
I think the most difficult part, it's a really good question. I mean, I think overall, it's not having the life I expected to have. I had a very different picture of what it would be like to have children and like a child life and like the things that I pictured that I would do with my children, because now Levi has a physical disability. So he regained a lot of his mobility in his arm and his leg. And he's, I guess we could say, very functional in the sense that he can walk and he can run. but it's a very modified gait, and he's not quick. And he fatigues very easily. And so the things that we're able to do are just very different than what I expected. And I would say as children age, so do the expectations that you realize that you had that you have lost age. For instance, when he was 2, or maybe let's say when he was 3, I could still put him in a stroller or put him in a backpack, and we could still do things like hiking. We could still do things as a family that I'd always pictured. But now, as he's a tween and he outweighs me by a good 30 pounds, I can't put him in a stroller anymore. And he's in an awkward middle stage where he's thankfully not in need of a wheelchair, but isn't able to do things as a typically able-bodied person would be. So I feel like the idea of the expectations I had and constantly having to recalibrate the expectations to grieve them, but then also to create new dreams and expectations. And in some cases, grieve some of those as well. Yeah. So I think that's what comes to me as the hardest part.
Right.
And then of course, yes, I'm talking about me, but then of course, the heartbreak as a mom, as you watch your child get dealt a real bad hand. I think about the things that he's been through as a 2 and 3-year-old that most adults don't have to deal with. I think, we all have stuff, but I feel like he got an extra helping. And I think as a mom, the heartbreak that asks you to be with, it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very much connected too. It's you were saying that you were talking about yourself and your response to how you felt, and then you as a mom, but they're so much connected, and it's so woven together. What are some of the things that helps him cope when he has some of these challenges, like if he gets fatigued, or you mentioned some of the behavioral issues? What are some of the things that he goes to help him get through difficult experiences?
One of my jokes is that he's hug powered, and it's actually really sweet that I have the video is so sweet. It's him and one of his physical therapists, because we were inpatient for 2 months as he rehabilitated to the point where they felt comfortable sending us home to continue rehabilitation. And so we had a lot of time doing therapy. He was, I think, trying to navigate a step, and needed a lot of verbal prompting. And this therapist, her name is Wendy, and we love her and still. And she was like, "Do you need a hug?" And he's like, "Yeah." Aww. And they just have this moment where she just hugs him, and she's like, "You ready to go?" He's like, "Yeah." And he even now, this morning, he was like, "Hey Mom, I forgot to give you something." Aww. And he comes and gives me this big bear hug. And so I would say hugs. So hugs help him. And I would say, we know, in all honesty, we are still figuring out what helps him. I think it's going to be something that we're always learning. And I would say that we have put a lot of effort into learning emotional regulation skills and identifying where we're at, asking for what we need. So that is something that is very helpful. He also, I would say, he really loves music. And so I would say what's very comforting to him is prayer and music. Specifically, he likes praise and worship music. And so he does find a lot of comfort in that. And it's interesting, as he's different than I think even some of my other children, where he talks about heaven, and he's like, "Mom, I cannot wait to go to heaven." And it just makes my heart happy. My hope is that he has a long, lovely life and that he doesn't go there as soon as he might want to. But it also gives me a lot of peace knowing that the reality is that he has some very complex medical situations still. That for me, like, it gives him peace and it gives me a lot of peace as well.
Oh, I love that. And what about you? What helps you cope? I can guess that it was kind of this transition to life coach and what you discovered about yourself and what you're now giving to other people, but talk to us about how you get through the hard, tough moments.
Yeah. So yes, you are right on that. I think my journey to becoming a coach was, I think what I realized once I was in the experience of having this challenge is that I was vastly unequipped to be able to emotionally navigate what it was asking me to do. Like, I could do the stoic thing really well, but what I didn't yet know how to do was to come out of that, is to actually then go to experience the fullness of my emotions. One of the things that helps me cope is actually allowing anger, allowing sadness. And like, I have like 1,000,001 exercises that help people do that. And I use them all myself. And I'm always, I would say, experimenting to continue growing in that area, because I don't know that there's a cap on that.
Right.
And so I do a lot of experimentation.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I'm like, I love what you just said. I talk a lot about allowing emotions like sadness and grief.
Yes.
But what about the anger? Like, we have to have a place to put that. We really
Yes,
do,
we
because
do.
you can't push it down.
Yeah. And I learned that the hard way, because I definitely tried. Here's what's interesting about anger is I think most people don't actually realize how angry they are. Or some people feel more comfortable with sadness, or vice versa with anger. I think maybe there's some family origin issues that are at play there. I know for myself that I always equated anger to danger. And so therefore I was like, danger, like, no, bad. You're not supposed to be angry. Like, good girls aren't angry. And I was never explicitly taught that. I have wonderful parents. And somewhere along the line, I decided that anger was bad and that you should definitely never show anybody anger, and you should definitely not feel anger. But I think the experience for me, when I learned how to allow my anger, express my anger, there's actually an exercise called anger on purpose. And it can look a lot of different ways. But like, for some people, it could look like going and like banging a trash can like to smithereens. Or for me, like, what feels the most expressive to me is to like scream like really loud, and just to allow anything that wants to come out. And it's actually a little like, and I like to be complete private for it, because I'm like, and nobody got to see this. Like, this is just a private thing for me.
Yeah.
And so, but when I was like, we don't nobody needs to be part of it. But when I allow that, it is such a relief that it's like, on the other side is a little bit of exhaustion, but it's a good kind of exhaustion. It's like finally being able to like not have to work so hard to suppress something.
Yeah.
And I also find that on the other side of that is deep, deep connection. That when I allow that expression of whatever emotion it is that I've been holding back, that I feel so deeply connected to myself. And it's a really, really good feeling. And so that's one thing where when I recognize like what's on the other side is so much better than holding it in and trying to contain whatever emotion is there.
Oh, that's so valuable, because as a parent, you feel a lot of times like you're just giving so much of yourself away, and it's to your children and you love them, or to your spouse, or to your job. So whenever you can connect to yourself, that's so valuable. I love that.
Thanks.
So if the listeners want to maybe get a coaching session with you, listen to your podcast, follow along with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so obviously the podcast is easily available or easily accessible on all the major players. And you just look, or as my kids say these days, you search up. It's a new way of saying look up.
You search up.
You search up the Special Needs Mom podcast and it'll come right up. And I would say that to explore the idea of coaching, I think is the biggest gift anybody can give themselves, in the sense that it's essentially giving yourself access to the tools that you may not have already, probably don't, because we're not taught a lot of these things. But really more than that, it's giving yourself the gift of awareness so that you can change something. We cannot change what we're not aware is there. And so that's really what coaching is and what coaching does. And I found that most of my clients want to be in group sessions. And it really surprised me at first, because I really had only ever done one-on-one coaching, and I do still offer that, but that many of the moms that I work with feel very alone and feel very isolated. And so therefore the idea of being amongst moms that got them, that understood what they were going through, and that would hold them in that space was really appealing to them. And so I have a group coaching program, and I call it Being Mom Together. The being comes from, I'm an ontological coach, which means, is a big fancy word for saying who we're being. And so the idea is like really examining together who we're being about something, knowing that that's going to inform everything, inform our experience of it, the results we produce, how we parent, how we navigate, these impossible circumstances that, brain tumors create. And so the best way to reach me, I would say, is the best way that is the easiest way for anybody. So I'm at coach@kararyska.com,
okay,
or on Instagram at kararyska, and it's KARARYSKA. And then I'm sure we can put a link on your show notes.
Yes.
That easily gives access to schedule. And so I make scheduling consults with me really easy, where I have a little scheduling tool where you just have to click a couple buttons, put in your information, and you find a time that works for you.
Awesome. I will definitely link all that in the show notes. And then I have one final question for you, which is probably the most difficult question.
Oh, no.
I would love for you to tell us what Levi has taught you over these past 12 years.
What's difficult about this question is paring it down to not talk for a long time.
Exactly.
Okay.
You figured it out.
So much of parenting a child that is now different than I expected him to be is like he also falls outside of what could be called typical. He does a lot of things that are surprising and maybe even upsetting, from the behavioral, not maybe upsetting, very upsetting from the behavioral standpoint. And so loving Levi means loving all of it. The explosions, the cussing, the flipping me off, the stealing, all the appointments, all the really, really hard feelings to be with. And so I feel like as I have been confronted with all of that, I feel like it's opened up my capacity to love all of that in me. And all of the parts of me that are unpleasant, unkind, judgmental. And I mean, I think parenting in general is a real great tool for self-reflection.
Yes.
but special needs parenting, or maybe like life critical parenting, I feel like might be a fast track
Yeah.
to really get down to the heart of who you are, how you are, and how you love. And I think that like the idea, like because children like Levi were already confronted with the idea that like nothing's expected, like the idea that like the vulnerability level in loving somebody that has a complex medical need helps you realize how uncertain life is, that there's no guarantee tomorrow. And so I feel like once we get that out of the way, then it's like we can unattach to all those expectations I was talking about earlier, and then just be there for what's there, like learning to accept it and love it and to feel it.
I just think that is the most beautiful place to end this wonderful conversation. Kara, thank you so much for being here today. Kara's last name is spelled Ryska, and her name is spelled with a K. So let me say that more clearly. Kara, KARARYSKA.com is where you can find her podcast and her life coaching services. All right, guys, thank you so much, and I will see you here next week for a 12-minute talk. Thank you for listening to the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor, and you can follow us at Child Life On Call on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please rate and review to make it easier for other families to find us. We have cute merch available at www.bonfire.com/store/childlifeoncall, and you can listen to more episodes and find resources at childlifepodcast.com.